Thank you. So Stephen George, European Space Agency and the Plant-Based Treaty. Thank you for the great talk, and thank you for all the work that you do. It's really, really great work. So since this is the first COP that has a day dedicated to food systems, I wanted to ask the following. So scientists have warned us that even if we halt fossil fuels today, food emissions alone are enough to put the 1.5 and 2 degrees targets out of reach. Could you explain what the role of the global food system is in getting us back within the planetary boundaries? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. No, it's a really important question, and particularly given the point I made earlier that I think the most important outcome at COP28 is really on the mitigation fossil fuel phase-out agenda, which of course has to do with the fact that we are at UAE and we have an oil and gas state convening the COP, which means that they have a particular responsibility but also convening power. But you're absolutely right, the food system transition is equally important. It's really essential that we all are aware that the only reason why the IPCC and the planetary boundary science gives us a carbon budget for a safe and orderly phase out of fossil fuels is that we've already factored in very optimistic assumptions on a food system transition. So the food system today emits, it will be released actually in 2 days' time, the latest version of the global carbon budget. 4 billion tons of carbon dioxide on average per year. It adds up to 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent if you include the boundaries on nitrogen as well, because nitrous oxide, and then you have the methane part as well. But let's just focus on carbon dioxide for the moment. 4 is emitted. This is particularly encroaching on the land boundary, so expanding agriculture into intact nature, but also the production, land degradation, and all the diesel use and emissions from the production system itself is assumed to have a very positive and optimistic transition into becoming a net carbon sink of on average minus 5 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year within just 30 years' time. So this is, to your question, this is a major food system transformation. I even call this an agricultural revolution from +4 to -5 in one generation. Now, that is interesting and necessary. It's interesting because we have quite a lot of evidence that this is possible to do. And not only is it possible to do, it's part of the very rapidly emerging nature positive agenda. That to do this, you have to invest in different forms of regenerative, nature positive, or sustainable intensification measures, everything from conservation agriculture, abandoning plowing for minimum tillage systems, new crop rotations, better management of agricultural landscapes. I mean, we could go on a long time with all the practices that can be scaled to build more organic carbon and protect and build resilience in agricultural farming systems. The interesting with that is that it can only be achieved if you really use the boundaries on fresh water, nitrogen, phosphorus, land, and biodiversity. Those are the guides for that food system transition. But they all add up to carbon, and they all add up to going from emitting to sequestering carbon. So yes, the food system transition is absolutely necessary. And to your point, yes, there is science showing that even if we phase out fossil fuels, the food system itself can make us go through the 1.5 degrees Celsius. So you could say, of course, that just by agreeing on phasing out fossil fuels won't take us all the way. We need also major efforts on food transition. And then in that story, there's also health and malnutrition and inequities across the world in terms of how we handle the global food system. You have overconsumption in large parts of the world and underconsumption in vulnerable regions of the world. So it's also an enormous equity dimension. I should actually take the opportunity to mention that in my view, the planetary boundary science, which is a natural science framework, it's an earth system science framework, has a tremendous justice implication, because what it means is that you set finite boundaries. It translates to budgets, which has to be shared in an equitable way. So it's like in my view, the ultimate definition of justice. In the Anthropocene, where we're filling up the whole space on Earth, we need to share it in an equitable way. But if you put absolute boundaries, it really makes it very clear that you cannot do like, George W. Bush the Elder in 1992 at the Rio conference to say that the American lifestyle is not up for negotiations. Well, dear friends, it is up for negotiations today because now we have this finite space defined by the planetary boundaries. And that's, I think, very helpful. And it addresses specifically the food system.